Be a good sister. She hissed through the cracked doorway. I was 29. He struck me across the face for the last time. That night, I didn't cry. I filed a complaint. And when they laughed, I activated the one clause he signed when he married my mother. The one he forgot about. My family was once a haven, now it's a hunting ground. They thought I'd be silent forever, but they didn't know I held the evidence to take everything. My name is Lena. In the crisp, logical world of data strategy, where I spend 40, sometimes 60 hours a week, I am a conductor of an orchestra of numbers. I live in Portland, where the persistent drizzle seems to wash the world in shades of thoughtful gray, a perfect backdrop for the clean, predictable lines of code and probability models that are my trade. I translate chaos into clarity for a large insurance firm. I build frameworks that predict risk, quantify uncertainty, and turn a million disparate points of information into a single, elegant truth. My professional life is a testament to the power of seeing patterns, of understanding that every action has a predictable, measurable reaction. It is a sanctuary of reason. This sanctuary dissolves the moment I cross the threshold of my mother's house, the house I grew up in. There, I am no longer Lena the data strategist. I am an invariable that disrupts the system, an anomaly in an equation that was balanced long ago without my consent. My mother remarried 10 years ago. Her husband, Robert, is the undisputed sun in our family's small solar system. He is what my aunts and uncles, what my mother's friends, what everyone on the outside looking in would call a pillar of the community. He runs a successful construction consultancy. His handshake is firm, his voice a confident baritone that fills a room, and he projects an aura of absolute stability. He saved my mother from the financial and emotional wreckage of my father's early death. He provided, he protected, he became the patriarch, the foundation upon which their new family was built. And for that, my mother is endlessly, suffocatingly grateful. But foundations can be prisons. Inside the walls of that warm, well-appointed house in the suburbs, Robert's stability is a different thing entirely. It is control. His protection is possession. His guidance is a set of rigid, unwritten rules that everyone but me seems to have memorized. For years, his reign has been a quiet one, a campaign waged not with overt battles, but with 1,000 subtle cuts, a dismissive wave of his hand when I share a professional achievement that eclipses his understanding, a sharp, pointed question about my finances, always phrased as fatherly concern but designed to remind me of his perceived authority. Are you sure you can afford that car, Lena? The payments must be steep. You should have consulted me first. It wouldn't matter that I'd paid for the car in cash, a fact I never shared because any proof of my independence was treated as an act of rebellion. Sometimes the control becomes less subtle, a hand on my arm gripped just a little too tight to be affectionate, a physical full stop to a sentence he doesn't want me to finish. His voice would drop an octave into a low, menacing hum when I disagreed with him, a sound that promised consequences without ever stating them aloud. Once, during a heated debate about politics at the dinner table, he'd stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. His 6'2" frame loomed over me as he said, "This conversation is over." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict. My mother had immediately started clearing the plates, her movements brisk and nervous, a silent plea for the storm to pass. I swallowed it all, the condescension, the intimidation, the quiet threat that hummed beneath the surface of our family life like faulty wiring. I did it for my mother. I saw the way she looked at him, the way her shoulders relaxed when he entered a room, the way she clung to the illusion of safety he provided. After my father died, she was a ship without an anchor, adrift in a sea of grief and debt. Robert became her harbor. To challenge him would be to challenge her peace, to force her to see the rot in the timbers of the very ship she believed saved her. And so, for her, I had remained silent. I had coded myself to be compliant, to be agreeable, to be small. Then there is Rebecca, my half-sister, 10 years my junior. She is Robert's daughter, the true princess of his kingdom. To Rebecca, the family dynamic is not a problem to be solved. It is a fact of life, as immutable as gravity. She has never known a world without Robert's heavy presence, and she navigates it with an ease I can only envy and resent. She is the family's diplomat, its peacekeeper, and her primary mission is to manage me. Just let it go, Lena, she'll text me after a tense family dinner. You know how he gets. It's not worth the fight. Her favorite phrase, the one she deploys like a silver bullet to slay any of my burgeoning rebellions, is just try to be a good sister. What she means is, be a good shock absorber. She means your discomfort is a small price to pay for family stability. She means suffer for the greater good. The greater good, of course, is a world where Robert is never challenged, where Mom is never upset, and where Rebecca doesn't have to deal with the fallout. My role as the selfish one was assigned to me early. I was 16 when Robert, after only a year of marriage to my mom, took issue with a report card where I'd gotten AB+ in chemistry. It wasn't the grade itself, but the fact that I hadn't shown it to him first. I'd shown it to my mom, as I always had. This is a family, he had announced at dinner that night, holding the report card as if it were evidence in a murder trial. And in this family, we don't have secrets. Lena's decision to hide this from me shows a lack of respect for my position as the head of this household. I remember staring at him, utterly bewildered. It's AB+. I wasn't hiding it. Do not talk back to me, he'd said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an anvil. My mother said nothing. Rebecca, then a small child, looked from his face to mine, her eyes wide. Later that evening, my mother came to my room. He just wants to be involved, honey, she'd whispered, stroking my hair. He sees you as his own. You should try to see things from his perspective. You can be a little selfish sometimes, thinking only of yourself. Thinking of myself, that was the crime. The act of having a boundary, an opinion, a life that was not first filtered through the prism of his approval, was branded as selfishness. When I wanted to go to an out-of-state college, I was selfish for wanting to abandon the family. When I bought my own apartment downtown, I was selfish for not choosing a duplex closer to them. Every step I took toward my own life was framed as a step away from them, a betrayal of the unit Robert had so carefully constructed. So I learned to live a double life. At work, I am decisive, respected, and clear-eyed. I analyze complex systems and identify their fatal flaws. I am paid handsomely for my ability to speak truth to power. To point to a vulnerability and a strategy and say, this is a liability. This will fail. But at home, I am the flaw. I am the liability. I am the truth that everyone has agreed to ignore. I am the outsider in the only family I have. A stranger at a table laden with shared history that I am no longer allowed to claim as my own. The silence I kept was a debt I paid for a fragile peace, and with every passing year, the interest compounded, threatening to bankrupt my very soul. The air in my mother's house was thick with the cloying scent of vanilla frosting and forced cheer. It was Rebecca's 19th birthday, a milestone that Robert had orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. Balloons in tasteful shades of rose gold and cream bobbed against the ceiling. A catered buffet lined the dining room wall, and a curated playlist of inoffensive pop music trickled from hidden speakers. It was a perfect picture of suburban bliss, and like all perfect pictures, it was a carefully constructed lie. My presence was the crack in the facade. I had spent a week deliberating on the gift. A gift card felt impersonal. Clothes were a minefield of potential criticism about taste or price. Finally, I settled on something that felt like a genuine offering, a bridge across the chasm that had grown between us. It was an experience, not an object. A travel voucher for two for a 5-night stay at a resort in Hawaii, flights included. It was a piece of my world, a world of independence and possibility, that I wanted to share with her. Maybe, I thought with a foolish flicker of hope, it would remind her of the sister I used to be before I became a problem to be managed. I handed her the sleek black envelope after she'd blown out the candles on a cake that was more architectural marvel than dessert. She opened it, her eyes widening at the glossy brochure inside, a picture of a turquoise ocean kissing a white sand beach. "Oh my God, Lena," she breathed, a genuine smile for a moment erasing the practiced socialite mask she wore so often. "Now Hawaii. Are you serious?" "Happy birthday, Beck," I said, my own smile feeling less stiff than usual. "I thought you could take a friend. Get away after your exams are done." Before she could say more, a shadow fell over the table. "Robert." He plucked the voucher from Rebecca's hand. His movements were casual, but his eyes were sharp and cold. He held it up to the light, as if inspecting it for flaws. "How?" he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the surrounding chatter. The small circle of family and friends around the table went quiet, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure. "That's quite an extravagant gesture, Lena." The word hung in the air, *extravagant star. It wasn't a compliment. In Robert's lexicon, it was a synonym for reckless, for irresponsible, for *female star. "It's a special birthday," I replied, keeping my voice even. My heart had begun to beat a little faster, a familiar conditioned response to his scrutiny. He tapped the voucher with a thick finger. "Must be nice living in that downtown apartment, jetting off to Hawaii. Most young people are struggling to make ends meet." He turned his gaze to the wider audience, playing the part of the wise, concerned patriarch. "It's a different world from when we were young. No sense of fiscal responsibility." The blood began to prickle in my veins. This was his move, the public lecture disguised as sage wisdom, designed to diminish me, to paint my success not as the result of hard work, but as a flight of fancy and indulgence. "I'm sure Lena has it all under control," my mother murmured, her hands fluttering nervously in her lap. It was her standard, feeble attempt at de-escalation, a plea for me to stand down. But I had spent my entire adult life building a fortress of financial independence precisely so I would never be beholden to this man. His words weren't just an insult. They were an attempt to demolish the very foundation of my identity. "Actually, Robert," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "It's funny you should mention it. The data shows that my generation is one of the most fiscally conscious in history, largely because we have to be." He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Data? Is that all you know? You live in a world of spreadsheets, not a world of mortgages and hard work." He leaned in, his voice dropping so only the table could hear. "Maybe you should spend less on fantasy vacations for your sister, and think about paying down that mortgage on your condo. It's not smart to be house poor." That was it. The final, deliberate strike. He knew I didn't have a mortgage. He knew I had paid for my condo with a down payment so significant my monthly dues were less than the rent on a studio apartment in the suburbs. He knew because my mother had told him, her voice swelling with a pride that he had quickly and efficiently extinguished. He wasn't mistaken. He was lying. He was trying to rewrite my reality to fit his narrative of me as a foolish, dependent girl. The years of swallowed insults, of choked-back retorts, of strategic retreats, they all came to a head. The dam of my silence, so carefully maintained for a decade, finally broke. "I don't have a mortgage, Robert," I said, my voice clear and steady. It didn't waver. Every head at the table was now turned toward us, a captive audience in a theater of cruelty. "I own my home, and I have never, not once, taken a single cent from you or Mom since the day I turned 18. My finances are my own. You have no right to comment on them." The silence that followed was absolute. I had not shouted. I had not cried. I had simply stated a fact, and that, I realized in the split second before it happened, was the most unforgivable sin of all. I had presented him with a data point that contradicted his worldview, and his system could not compute it. So he crashed. His hand moved so fast I barely registered the motion. It was the crack of the impact that I processed first, a sound like a dry branch snapping. Then came the explosion of heat and light on my left cheek. A blinding, stinging pain that radiated from my jaw to my temple. My head whipped to the side, my hair flying across my face. The room tilted, the rose gold balloons swimming in my vision. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer expectant. It was horrified, suffocating. I could feel the collective intake of breath, the frozen stares of my aunts, my uncles, Rebecca's friends. I slowly turned my head back to face him. His face was contorted in a mask of rage, his chest heaving. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her hands, her knuckles white where she gripped the linen napkin in her lap. Her face was a blank sheet of paper, her expression utterly, devastatingly empty. She did not look at me. She did not look at him. She had simply vacated the premises of her own life. Then, a hand was on my arm. Rebecca, her face was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic, panicked energy. But it wasn't fear for me, it was fear for her party, for the perfect picture. "Come on," she hissed, her fingers digging into my bicep. She pulled me up from my chair and began steering me toward the back door, away from the silent, staring guests. Her movements were urgent, efficient. She was the public relations manager handling a crisis. As we stumbled into the cool, damp air of the backyard, she finally spoke, her voice a furious whisper. "What is wrong with you? Why do you always have to push him?" I stared at her, the throbbing in my cheek a pulsing metronome counting down the final seconds of my old life. "He hit me." "Rebecca, I know," she said, refusing to meet my eyes. She smoothed down her party dress, her gaze fixed on the perfectly manicured lawn. "But you provoked him. You know how he is. You can't just embarrass him in front of everyone like that." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading, not for my well-being, but for my compliance. "Please, Lena, just for tonight. Be a good sister. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Don't make a scene." That's what she meant. My public humiliation, my physical pain, was just a scene, a minor disruption in the birthday programming. And in that moment, I saw with the brutal, unforgiving clarity of a data analyst that I had no sister. I had no mother. I was an outsider, a foreign body that the system was violently trying to expel. I pulled my arm from her grasp. I didn't say a word. I walked back through the house, past the frozen tableau of guests who pretended to be fascinated by their plates, past my mother, who still hadn't moved, past Robert, who watched me with a look of smug triumph, as if his violence had proven his point. I picked up my purse and my keys from the hall table and walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. The 20-minute drive back to my apartment was a blur. The city lights smeared through the rain-streaked windshield. I didn't cry. The place inside me where tears were made had turned to ice. The pain in my cheek was no longer a hot sting but a cold, heavy ache, a physical reminder of a truth I could no longer ignore. The system wasn't just flawed. It was corrupt. The equation wasn't just unbalanced, it was designed to equal my subjugation. I walked into my apartment, the quiet, orderly space a balm to my fractured senses. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour a drink. I walked to the heavy steel safe hidden in the back of my bedroom closet. My fingers were steady as I spun the combination, a sequence of numbers from my past, from before. The safe clicked open with a satisfying thud. Inside, beneath my passport and the deed to my condo, was a thick yellow document folded in thirds. I pulled it out. The paper was heavy, official. I hadn't looked at it in years. I had received my copy from my father's estate lawyer when I turned 21, a strange inheritance that had seemed irrelevant at the time. I unfolded it under the sharp white light of my desk lamp. The title at the top was clear, Joint Property Agreement. It was the prenuptial contract my mother had insisted on when she and Robert married, back when she still had enough of her old fire to protect her assets. It stipulated the terms of ownership for the house, the one asset she had brought into the marriage, paid for with my father's life insurance. And there, in dense legalistic type, was the clause, the one my father's lawyer had insisted on to protect me. It named me, Lena, as a silent, non-resident co-owner of the property, my share held in trust. But there was more, a subclause, one I had forgotten about until this very moment, a morality clause. It stated that in the event of documented domestic abuse perpetrated by Robert, his spousal claim to the property would be subject to immediate review and potential forfeiture, a process which could be initiated by either of the other two signatories, my mother or me. He had signed it. His arrogant, looping signature was right there at the bottom of the page. He had signed away his kingdom before he'd even been crowned, so sure of his own power that he never bothered to read the fine print. He had forgotten, but data strategists have very, very good memories. I sat there in the silent pool of light, the document in my hands, the throbbing in my cheek subsided, replaced by the slow, steady hum of a machine powering on. They thought a slap would be the end of the argument. They had no idea it was just the beginning of the war. That night, I did not cry. I began to plan. The hours that followed my return from the party bled into one another, a long, slow procession of minutes measured by the rhythmic drumming of rain against my window panes. The city of Portland was weeping. A fitting soundtrack for the funeral of the woman I used to be. I sat in the dark. The legal document, a pale rectangle on the coffee table, a ghost of a promise made long ago. The throbbing in my cheek had subsided to a dull, persistent ache, a physical anchor to the storm of memories the slap had unleashed. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet order, had transformed into a courtroom of the mind. I was the prosecutor, the defendant, the judge, and the jury. And the evidence, long buried in the archives of my memory, was now being presented piece by painful piece. Each recollection was an exhibit, a data point in a pattern of abuse I had refused to acknowledge for over a decade. Silence, I had told myself, was a strategy for survival, a way to protect my mother, to keep the fragile peace. But sitting there in the gloom, I began to understand. My silence had not been a shield, it had been permission. My mind drifted back 12 years. I am 17. The world is a canvas of possibilities. And I am experimenting with color, with identity. It's the night of a school dance, and I'm standing in front of the full-length mirror, in my childhood bedroom. I'm wearing a dress I'd saved up for weeks to buy. It's black, knee-length, with thin spaghetti straps and a bit of lace along the neckline. It's not provocative, not by the standards of my peers, but it is mine. It feels like me. It's the first time I felt truly beautiful in my own skin, not in a way that sought approval, but in a way that felt authentic. My mother is in the room, her face a mixture of pride and a familiar, low-grade anxiety. "You look lovely, honey," she says, her hands fluttering as she fusses with one of my straps. "Are you sure Robert will be okay with it?" The question is a small, cold stone in my stomach. Since when did my clothing require his approval before I could answer? He is there, filling the doorway, his bulk and presence sucking the air out of the room. He doesn't look at my face. His eyes rake over me, a slow, possessive inventory from my shoulders to my knees, his lip curls in a sneer. "What is that?" he asks, his voice deceptively soft. "It's my dress for the dance," I say, trying to keep the defiance from my voice. "No," he says, stepping into the room. That is not a dress. That is a slip. You are not leaving this house looking like that. You look cheap. The word hangs in the air, ugly and sharp. My mother starts to speak. A week now, Robert. It's what all the girls are wearing, but he cuts her off with a glare. I don't care what all the girls are wearing. I care about the reputation of this family, my family. He turns back to me. Go and change. Put on something respectable. Something inside me, that new, fragile sense of self, refuses to buckle. No, I say. My voice is quiet, but it's the loudest sound in the room. I like this dress. I'm wearing this dress. I see the flicker in his eyes. The surprise giving way to a cold, hard fury. It's not about the dress. It was never about the dress. It's about the word no. It's a word his system is not designed to accept from me. He takes another step toward me, and my mother physically shrinks back, her hand flying to her mouth, but he doesn't touch me. He turns his attention to the desk in the corner of my room where my laptop is open, my history paper half-written on the screen. You spend too much time on this thing, he says, his voice a low growl, surfing the internet, getting ideas. Ideas about what to wear. Ideas about disrespecting your elders. And then, in one swift, violent motion, he sweeps the laptop off the desk. It hits the hardwood floor with a sickening crack of plastic and a final, percussive smash. The screen goes black. The room is silent, save for the faint, high-pitched whine of dying electronics. He had destroyed my connection to the world. My schoolwork, my photos, my conversations with friends, all of it gone. It was a message delivered with brutal efficiency. I will control your world. I will sever any part of it that I cannot command. I look at my mother. I am pleading with my eyes for her to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge the violence that has just occurred. She avoids my gaze. She looks at the shattered laptop on the floor, then at Robert's rigid back as he storms out of the room. She turns to me, her face pale, her expression one of profound disappointment, and she says the words that will echo in my memory for the next 12 years. Lena, why do you have to provoke him? You know how he is. You should have just changed. The blame, as always, was redirected to me. My defiance, not his violence, was the original sin. Rebecca was only 7. She had been standing in the hallway, peeking around the doorframe. I remember her wide, frightened eyes. Later that night, after I'd cried myself into a raw, hollowed-out state, she crept into my room and whispered, "Mom said you made Dad angry." Even then, at 7 years old, she was learning the family script. The rain on my window pane becomes the sound of the shower I took that night, scrubbing my skin, as if I could wash away the shame, the helplessness. The chill in my apartment is the same chill that settled in my bones and never quite left. My mind fast-forwards 4 years. I am 21, a junior in college, 3 states away. The physical distance has been a lifeline, a place to breathe and grow, to become the person whose opinions are valued, whose intellect is celebrated. It is the week before Thanksgiving, and I'm on the phone with my mother, finalizing my travel plans. Robert gets on the extension. The conversation starts innocently enough. He asks about my classes. I tell him about a political science course that has fascinated me, about a debate we had in class about economic policy. I make the mistake of sharing my own opinion, an opinion that is well-researched, passionately held, and contrary to his own. The shift in his tone is immediate. The faux fatherly interest evaporates, replaced by a condescending chill. He calls my professor an ivory tower liberal. He calls my arguments naive. I push back, citing sources, making my case. I am not angry or disrespectful. I am simply engaging in a debate, the kind I have every day in my classes. But in Robert's world, A woman with a contrary opinion is not debating, she is demonstrating a flaw in her character. You've developed quite an attitude at that school, Lena, he says, his voice laced with ice. A real lack of respect. It's not an attitude, Robert, I counter. My patience wearing thin. It's a point of view. We are allowed to have different ones. Not in my house, he says. And then the verdict, and you know what? If you're going to bring that sarcastic, ungrateful attitude with you, then maybe you shouldn't bother coming home for Thanksgiving at all. This holiday is for family who appreciate each other. The line goes dead. I stand in my dorm room, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The dial tone. A flat, monotonous drone, exiled for having an opinion. I call back, but it goes to voicemail. Later, my mother calls. Her voice is strained, apologetic, but not for him, for the situation. Just call him back and apologize, honey, she begs. Tell him you were tired and stressed. Just smooth it over. It's Thanksgiving. Don't ruin it for everyone. Ruin it for everyone. My banishment wasn't the thing that would ruin the holiday. My refusal to submit to the banishment was the crime. I called Rebecca, who was 11 and already a perfect miniature of my mother's appeasement strategy. I thought perhaps she would be on my side. He was really mad, she said, her voice small. You were yelling at him. I wasn't yelling, but we were having a debate. Well, it sounded like yelling. Why can't you just say sorry? He just wants us all to be happy. There it was again. His happiness. The central sun around which we all must orbit. Her happiness, my mother's. They were all contingent on his. My own was irrelevant. I did not go home for Thanksgiving that year. I spent it in the deserted quiet of my dorm, eating cheap pizza, and trying to convince myself that my independence was worth the profound, aching loneliness. Back in the present, I rise from the couch and walk to the window, staring out at the blurred lights of the city. The slap on my cheek was just a punctuation mark in a long, ongoing sentence. The smashed laptop, the holiday exile, the endless stream of dismissive comments, the subtle controlling gestures, they weren't isolated incidents. They were a carefully plotted graph, a trend line of escalating dominance. And I, the data analyst, had been staring at the raw numbers for years, refusing to run the analysis. I had coded each incident as a one-off, an anomaly to be discarded. I had lied to myself. I had created a false narrative of a difficult, but loving family because the truth was too painful to compute. The truth was that my mother's avoidance was not a weakness, it was a choice. She chose his comfort over her daughter's safety. Again and again, Rebecca's calls for peace were not born of a love for family, but from a pragmatic allegiance with its sole dictator. They were collaborators in his quiet reign. And my silence, my God, my silence. I had believed it was a noble sacrifice, a daughter's burden. But they didn't see it as a sacrifice, they saw it as capitulation. They saw it as weakness. Every time I backed down, every insult I swallowed, every time I chose retreat over confrontation, I was feeding the monster. I was teaching him that the boundaries could be pushed further next time. I was confirming his belief that I was weak, that I would, in the end, always break. A cold, hard clarity settled over me, as clean and sharp as a line of code. It was not grief I felt. Grief is for something you have lost. I was finally seeing that I had never truly had the family I was grieving for. What I felt now was something else. It was the quiet, terrifying calm of a system that has finally, irrevocably, been debugged. They had mistaken my silence for submission for the last time. Now they would learn the price of a variable they had so profoundly miscalculated. The Sunday morning after the party, my apartment was unnaturally quiet. The rain had stopped, and a weak, watery sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the floor in bars of grey and white. The emotional storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind a landscape of stark, cold clarity. The grief, the anger, the years of accumulated pain, I packed them away. Emotion was a liability now. It was noise in the data. My objective was not to feel, it was to execute. My first task was to document the primary exhibit. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. The bright vanity lights showed the damage in unforgiving detail. The left side of my face was a mottled canvas of purple, and a sickly yellow-green. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the outline of his fingers was still faintly visible on my cheek, a phantom handprint. I picked up my phone with the clinical detachment of a scientist documenting a specimen. I began taking photographs. I took them from the front, from the side, with and without a flash. I held up a copy of the day's newspaper, in one shot to timestamp the image. Each click of the camera was a small, satisfying act of rebellion, turning my pain into a permanent, undeniable record. My professional life is built on the principle that a single data point is an anecdote, but a pattern is evidence. The slap was the catalyst, but it wasn't the entire case. I needed to establish the pattern. I spent the next several hours in front of my laptop. Not the shattered one from my youth, but a sleek, powerful machine that was the engine of my independence. I wasn't just looking for evidence, I was building a dataset. I created a new encrypted file on my server. The first folder was labeled Physical Evidence, and into it went the timestamped photos. The second was Property, which held a high-resolution scan of the joint property agreement. The third, I labeled Historical Data. This was the most difficult part. I began to comb through a decade of my digital life, searching for the breadcrumbs of Robert's control. I found emails from my mother where she'd written, "Robert thinks it would be better if you didn't," or "We need to run this by Robert first." I found old text message threads with Rebecca, a litany of "Just let it go, Lena," and "You're overreacting." Each one was screenshot, dated, and filed away. They weren't proof of violence, but they were proof of the system, the pervasive, accepted culture of his authority, and my expected submission. I knew I needed something more, something current, something that captured not just his past actions, but his present state of mind, his unshakable belief in his own impunity. I knew he would call. He wouldn't be able to resist the urge to reassert his control, to ensure my silence. He would expect tears, apologies, and a daughter begging to be let back into the family fold. The call came just after noon. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, steadying breath, and tapped the screen to start a voice recording before I answered. "Hello." I kept my voice neutral, flat. "Lena." His voice was a low, paternal rumble. It was the voice he used when he was about to deliver a lecture he expected to be received with solemn gratitude. "I'm glad I reached you. Your mother is very upset." The classic opening gambit, frame my mother's distress as my fault, not his. "I'm sure she is," I said. "Last night was unfortunate." He continued, the word *unfortunate* doing the work of 1,000 unsaid apologies. It was an event, a weather phenomenon, not an action he had taken. "You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed the family. And you put me in a very difficult position. You put yourself in that position, Robert." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, a slow, controlled sound. He was recalibrating his approach. "Listen to me," he said, the paternal tone hardening into something more menacing. "You have a choice to make. You can continue with this little drama, this childish tantrum, and you will find that there are consequences, serious ones, or you can act like an adult. You can call your mother, apologize for the scene you created, and we can all move past this." "Apologize for what, exactly?" I asked, my voice still a monotone. I was baiting the hook. "For your disrespect," he snapped, the facade of calm cracking. For your arrogance, for thinking you can speak to me like that in my own home. I was trying to teach you a lesson about humility. You seem to have forgotten your place in this family, and it was my duty to remind you. There it was. Not a direct confession to the slap, but something better, a confession to the motive, a full-throated defense of his right to discipline a 29-year-old woman. It was a confession to the entire ideology that underpinned his reign of terror. So this is my final word on the subject, he concluded, his voice dropping back into a threatening growl. You will drop this. You will not speak of it again to anyone. If you do, I promise you, you will regret it. You will find out just how long and unforgiving my memory can be. Do you understand me? I understand perfectly, I said, and ended the call. I saved the audio file, labeled it threat and confession, and uploaded it to the server. The dataset was now complete. The next morning, I did not go to work. I logged on, sent a brief email to my boss citing a family emergency, and then I turned my full attention to finding a weapon. A simple family lawyer wouldn't do. My fight wasn't about alimony or custody. My primary leverage, the document that had sat in my safe for 8 years, was a property agreement. My battlefield was real estate law. I spent 3 hours vetting law firms in downtown Portland. I cross-referenced their specialties, read partner bias, and searched for case histories in property litigation. I wasn't looking for a bulldog. I was looking for a surgeon. I found her in a boutique firm specializing in high-asset complex property disputes. Her name was Anna Sharma. Her online profile was concise and formidable, Columbia Law, 20 years of experience, a focus on contractual enforcement. I sent a brief, carefully worded email through her firm's secure portal, requesting a consultation and mentioning a prenuptial property agreement and a domestic incident. Her assistant called me back within the hour. I had an appointment for that afternoon. Anna Sharma's office was on the 30th floor of a glass tower, with a view of the Willamette River. She was a woman in her late 40s, sharp, elegant, with eyes that seemed to analyze everything with a calm, discerning intelligence. She listened without interruption, as I laid out my story. I did not cry. I presented the facts in chronological order, as if I were briefing her on a corporate account. I told her about the long history of control, the incident at the party, and the phone call from the day before. When I was finished, I took out my tablet and a small USB drive. Here are the photos of my injury, time-stamped, I said, swiping through the images. Here is a scan of the joint property agreement. And here is the audio file of the phone call I had with him yesterday. I watched her face as she put on a pair of headphones and listened to the recording. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw a subtle tightening in her jaw. When it was finished, she took off the headphones and looked at the scanned document on the screen, her eyes scanning the dense text. She paused, zoomed in on one section, and then read it again. Mitchell, she said, her voice crisp and professional. You have been remarkably thorough. Most clients come to me with a story. You've come to me with a case. She turned her monitor toward me, pointing to the section she had been studying. It was the morality clause. This is an exceptionally well-drafted clause, she said. Your father's lawyer was very forward-thinking. Most clauses of this nature are vague. This one is not. It specifically defines documented domestic abuse to include not only a police report or a conviction, but also the issuance of a restraining order. And it gives you, as a co-signatory, the independent right to invoke it. What does invoking it actually mean? I asked. It means, she said, leaning forward, that we can go to a judge and file for an immediate injunction against this property. It would freeze the asset. Robert wouldn't be able to sell it, refinance it, or borrow against it. It would effectively sever his financial access to what is likely his largest single asset. But this clause goes further. It gives you the standing to petition the court to have his residency rights suspended pending a final hearing on the division of the asset. I felt a slow, cold thrill spread through me. This is more than I had hoped for. So I can have him removed from the house. That would be the ultimate goal of the petition. Yes. It's not just about suing him for assault, which you can and should do in civil court. This is about leverage. This is about using his own signature against him to dismantle the very foundation of his power, the home he rules from. The assault gives us the key. This clause unlocks the door. We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. It was like the project planning sessions I ran at work, complete with phases, deliverables, and risk assessments. Phase 1, the immediate threat. We would file for an emergency restraining order first thing in the morning. I would write out a detailed declaration, including the history of his controlling behavior, the smashed laptop, the Thanksgiving exile, and culminating in the assault at the birthday party. The photos and the audio recording would be submitted as evidence. This was the legal trigger. Phase 2, the financial freeze. The moment the restraining order was granted, Anna would file the property injunction, formerly known as a lease pendens. A notice would be attached to the property's title, visible to any bank, lender, or potential buyer, declaring it as the subject of ongoing litigation. Robert's financial world, at least as it pertained to the house, would grind to a halt. Phase 3, the civil action. We would file a separate civil suit for assault and battery. This would run in parallel, a second front designed to increase the legal and financial pressure on him. As I stood to leave, Anna looked at me, her professional demeanor softening for a moment. This is going to be a war, Lena. Your family will not react well. Are you prepared for that? I thought of my mother's averted eyes, of Rebecca's hissed command to be a good sister. I thought of the years of silence. I'm not the one who declared war, I said. I'm just the one who's finally fighting back. I walked out of the law office and into the late afternoon sun. I felt no joy, no rush of victory. I felt the quiet, grim satisfaction of a strategist whose plan has just been validated. I had spent my life analyzing systems, and I had finally turned that analytical gaze on the most broken system I knew. The time for observation was over. It was time to force a system crash. The Multnomah County Courthouse was an imposing block of granite and glass, a place designed to make human problems feel small and orderly. Standing on its wide, windswept steps the Tuesday morning after I'd met with Anna Sharma, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was not a family home thick with unspoken rules and emotional tripwires. This was a system, and systems were my native language. I understood the logic of inputs and outputs, of evidence leading to verdicts. For the first time in this conflict, I felt like I was on home turf. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and institutional cleaning fluid. Anna met me in the lobby, a sleek leather briefcase in her hand, her presence a bubble of sharp, focused energy. She led me to a quiet alcove, away from the shuffling lines and echoing announcements. She handed me a thick sheath of papers. It was my declaration, the narrative that would serve as the foundation for the temporary restraining order. I had spent all of Monday writing it, pouring 12 years of memories onto the page with the dispassionate precision of an analyst preparing a report. Reading it now, bound and stapled and ready for a judge's eyes, was a surreal experience. The shattered laptop was Exhibit A. The Thanksgiving exile was Exhibit B. The years of financial questioning, the subtle physical intimidations, the condescending remarks, they were all there, no longer just painful memories, but itemized grievances in a legal filing. And at the end, the assault at Rebecca's party, described in flat, factual detail, accompanied by the glossy, clinical photographs of my bruised face. The final exhibit was a full transcript of Robert's threatening phone call. "Are you ready?" Anna asked, her gaze steady. I nodded, my throat tight, but my resolve firm. I am. We walked to the clerk's window and filed the paperwork. The process was anticlimactic. A simple exchange of documents and a stamped receipt. There was no drama, no shouting, just the quiet, methodical turning of a great legal machine. An emergency hearing was set for a judge to review the petition that afternoon without Robert present. That was the nature of a temporary order. It was an emergency measure to ensure immediate safety. He would get his chance to argue against it later. I spent the afternoon in the sterile quiet of my apartment, tracking the case status online, as if it were a stock price. The update came at 3:47 p.m. The 3 letters I was looking for appeared next to the case number, G&T, granted. Anna called a few minutes later. The TRO has been approved. Lena, she said, her voice all business, the judge found your declaration credible and the evidence of a threat compelling. A sheriff's deputy is being dispatched to the house to serve Robert with the order. Now, he will be required to vacate the premises immediately. He will be allowed to gather his personal belongings under deputy supervision, and must then stay at least 100 yards away from you, your home, and your workplace. I closed my eyes, picturing it. A uniformed officer walking up the familiar flagstone path. Robert opening the door, his face shifting from surprise to indignant rage, as he was handed the papers. An officer of the law, a symbol of the very establishment he revered, telling him he was no longer the king of his castle. He was being, for the first time in his life, subjected to a system of rules that he did not write, and could not control. The fallout was immediate. My phone, which had been silent for 3 days, erupted. The first barrage came from Rebecca. A series of rapid-fire text messages, each one a digital bullet. What the hell did you do? A cop just came to the house. They are making Dad leave. Mom is hysterical. You are destroying this family. I can't believe how selfish you are. This is all your fault. I will never forgive you for this. I read each message, my thumbs scrolling dispassionately down the screen. The words were hot with rage, but they felt strangely distant, like signals from another galaxy. She wasn't yelling at the sister he had assaulted. She was yelling at the data point that had crashed her world. I took a screenshot of the entire conversation, saved it to my evidence file under the subfolder, harassment and intimidation, and then I blocked her number. The second wave was the phone call from my mother. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a fleeting second, the old, conditioned guilt tried to surface. I pushed it down and answered, my voice level. Lena. Her voice was choked with sobs, a thick, wet sound of utter despair. Lena, what have you done? Robert just called me. They are kicking him out of his own house. He has to go to a hotel. I got a restraining order. Mom, I said, the word sounded simple, clean, a restraining order against Robert. Why would you do such a thing? He would never hurt you. Her denial was so profound, so absolute, it was like a physical wall. She was not just ignoring the facts, she was living in an alternate reality, where they had never happened. He hit me, Mom, I said, in front of 20 people. It was a mistake, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. A terrible mistake. He was stressed. You were provoking him. It never should have happened. But this is insane. You're tearing our family apart over one mistake. One mistake. She had neatly edited the last 12 years into a single, forgivable error. This isn't about one mistake, I said calmly. This is about a pattern of behavior that I am no longer willing to accept. What are you talking about? Robert has been a wonderful husband to me, a wonderful father to Rebecca. Her voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, pleading. Honey, who is putting these ideas in your head? Is it that lawyer? Strangers don't understand our family. They don't understand how things are. You have to stop this. You have to call them and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. The four of us, she continued, her voice hopeful, we can go to counseling. Robert will apologize. Please, Lena, don't do this to us. Don't do this to us. The pronoun was a cage, and she was desperately trying to shove me back inside it. But for the first time, I could see the bars clearly. She wasn't asking me to save the family, she was asking me to save the system that kept her comfortable, the system that required my periodic sacrifice. There is no us to do this to anymore, Mom, I said, and the words were the coldest I had ever spoken. The matter is with the courts now. I can't talk about it. I ended the call before she could reply. Her heartbroken sobs cut off mid-syllable. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel triumph. I felt a profound and desolate sense of clarity. I had known they would react this way. My strategic plan had accounted for it, and their predictable, hysterical responses only served to validate my course of action. The next afternoon, I was back in Anna's office. The late sun streamed through the panoramic windows, but the mood was sober and focused. The TRO is in effect for the next 2 weeks until the formal hearing, she said, sliding a document across the polished mahogany table. Robert has been served. He has retained counsel. They will fight it. Of course, they will try to paint you as unstable, greedy, vindictive. Be prepared for that. I said. Good. Anna tapped the document. Phase 2 is also complete. The lease pendens was filed this morning. The property is officially frozen. We've already received an inquiry from Robert's bank regarding a pending line of credit he was applying for against the house. That application is now dead in the water. A small, grim smile touched my lips. The first financial consequence. Now, Anna continued, we move to the next step. We are leveraging the power granted to you in the joint property agreement. This is our petition to the court for a judicially supervised appraisal of the house in preparation for a forced partition and sale, or a buyout. She handed me a pen. This was it. The restraining order was a shield, a defensive maneuver. This was the sword. This was the document that said, I was not just seeking safety. I was seeking justice. I was activating the clause he had forgotten about, the clause that would turn his greatest asset into his greatest liability. I was taking the fight from the emotional battlefield of our family to the financial battlefield, where he believed he was invincible. Rebecca's angry texts, my mother's tearful pleas, they were the ghosts of the old system, trying to haunt me, to pull me back into the dark, but they were just noise. They had no power here. Here, there was only the contract, the evidence, the law. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name on the line. The courtroom was a study in beige and sheepwood veneer, a space designed to be devoid of personality or passion. It was an intentionally bland stage for the most passionate dramas of human life. The air was still and cool, smelling faintly of floor wax and the low-grade anxiety of a dozen strangers waiting for their turn before the judge. This was not a home. There were no ghosts here, no history. There was only the process, the cold, impartial machinery of the law. I sat beside Anna at our designated table, my back straight, my hands clasped loosely in my lap. I had dressed as if for a board meeting, a charcoal grey suit, a simple white silk blouse, my armor. Across the aisle, Robert sat with his lawyer, a man with a florid face and a suit that seemed a size too tight. Robert himself looked diminished in this setting, stripped of his home field advantage. He wasn't a patriarch, he was just a respondent, a name on a docket. He was attempting to project an aura of calm, wronged dignity, but a muscle jumping in his jaw betrayed his rage. In the gallery behind him sat my mother and Rebecca. My mother looked small and lost, her face pale and drawn, clutching a tissue in her hand. Rebecca sat ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on me with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. I did not meet her gaze. I did not look at them at all. They were no longer part of my data set. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s with tired, intelligent eyes that had seen everything. She moved with an efficiency that bordered on impatience. After the perfunctory call to order, she turned her attention to our case. We are here for the hearing on the petitioner's request for a permanent restraining order in the matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell, she said, her voice a dry monotone. Mr. Davies, for the respondent, you may begin. Robert's lawyer, Davies, rose to his feet. Your Honor, he began, his voice oozing practiced sincerity. What we have here is not a case of abuse, but a tragic family misunderstanding, cynically exploited for financial gain. My client, Mr. Robert Mitchell, is a respected businessman, a loving husband, and a devoted stepfather, who has provided for this family for over a decade. The petitioner, Ms. Lena Mitchell, has a history of being a difficult, rebellious young woman. He gestured toward me. She has concocted this malicious story, exaggerating a minor family argument into a tale of abuse for one reason, and one reason only, to trigger a clause in an old property agreement and seize control of the family home. This is a shakedown, Your Honor, plain and simple. An attempt to use the courts to extort a man who has given her nothing but support. I felt a cold, calm anger rise in me, but I did not move. I did not react. I was a statue. Davies continued, painting a picture of me as a spoiled, ungrateful child, spinning a web of lies. He dismissed the bruise on my face as something I could have done to myself, or the result of an accidental stumble. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, delivered for an audience of one, the judge. When he was finished, the judge looked at Anya. Ms. Sharma. Anna rose, her movements economical and precise. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage in histrionics. Your Honor, she said, Mr. Davies is painting a picture. I would prefer to present the facts. The petitioner, my client, is a successful data strategist. Her life is about facts, not fantasy. We have submitted a detailed declaration outlining a 12-year pattern of controlling and intimidating behavior by the respondent. We have submitted photographic evidence of the injuries my client sustained at the hands of the respondent on the night of September 21st. She paused, letting the words hang in the still air. Mr. Davies claims this was a minor family argument. I would now like to play a piece of evidence that speaks to the respondent's state of mind the day after this minor argument. It is an audio recording of a phone call he placed to my client. Davies shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This recording was made without my client's consent. It was made in a two-party consent state, Anya countered smoothly, but the petitioner was in Oregon, a one-party consent state at the time of the call, which makes it admissible. The judge waved a dismissive hand at Davies. Objection overruled. Proceed, Ms. Sharma. Anya placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed a button. The courtroom filled with the tiny, disembodied sound of Robert's voice. My voice was there too, calm and quiet, but his was the star of the show, the lecture, the condescension, and then the key lines. I was trying to teach you a lesson about humility. You seem to have forgotten your place in this family, and it was my duty to remind you. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was deafening. I risked a glance at Robert. His face was a mask of crimson fury, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He looked trapped. The voice on that recording was not the voice of a benevolent patriarch. It was the voice of a tyrant, a man who believed in his absolute right to teach lessons and enforce a place upon others. I could feel my mother's stare from the gallery. I did not have to look to know her expression would be one of pained betrayal, not betrayal by him, but by me for exposing him. Rebecca's hatred was probably a laser beam boring into the back of my skull. The judge stared at Robert, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice flat. "Is that your voice on the recording?" He hesitated, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. "It is," he finally gritted out. "But my words are being taken out of context." I was upset. She insulted me, embarrassed me in front of my family. "And so it was your duty to remind her of her place," the judge interrupted, one eyebrow slightly raised. Robert fell silent. Anna pressed on. "Your Honor, this is not about context. This is about a clear admission of motive, the motive to control, to dominate, and to punish. This is the very definition of domestic abuse. And it is this documented abuse that brings us to the second matter, the property at 1254, Elderwood Lane." Anna outlined the specifics of the joint property agreement, highlighting the morality clause. She explained that with the issuance of the TRO, the conditions of the clause had been met, giving me the legal standing to petition for the immediate suspension of Robert's residency rights pending a formal partition of the asset. Davies fought back, calling it a perversion of the contract's original intent, but his arguments were sputtering. The audio recording had sucked all the oxygen out of his defense. He was left with nothing but bluster. The judge listened to it all, her gaze moving from Anya to Davies to the documents in front of her. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, a gesture of profound weariness. "I have reviewed the petitioner's declaration," she said, her voice filling the silent room. "I have seen the photographs. I have listened to the recording. I find the petitioner's testimony to be credible. I find the respondent's testimony less so." She looked directly at Robert. "Mr. Mitchell, whatever your perception of your duty may be, in the state of Oregon, putting your hands on another person is not called teaching a lesson. It's called assault. The court finds that a preponderance of the evidence suggests a credible and ongoing threat to the petitioner." She put her glasses back on and picked up a document. "Therefore, the temporary restraining order is hereby made permanent, effective for a period of 1 year. The respondent is ordered to have no contact with the petitioner and to maintain a distance of 100 yards at all times." Then she turned to the property agreement regarding the petition related to the property on Elderwood Lane. "The court has reviewed the agreement signed by all 3 parties. The clause is unambiguous. The conditions for its activation have been met. Therefore, the court orders that the respondent's residency rights to the property are hereby suspended until such time as the civil matter of the property's partition is resolved." She banged the gavel. It was a sharp, final sound, an ending, and a beginning. It was over. Robert sat there, stunned, as if the judge had been speaking a foreign language. Anna gave my hand a slight, reassuring squeeze under the table. I took a slow, deep breath, the stale courtroom air feeling like the freshest I had ever tasted. I stood up, and for the first time, I turned and looked at the gallery. Rebecca's face was a mask of disbelief and rage. My mother was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. She looked up, and our eyes met. Her expression was not one of sympathy or understanding, it was one of utter devastation, the look of a woman whose carefully constructed reality had just been bulldozed. She looked at me as if I were the one holding the hammer. I felt a final, vestigial pang of something that might have once been love or pity. I extinguished it. It was a bug in the code, a remnant of a corrupt system. I turned my back on her, on both of them, and walked out of the courtroom beside my lawyer, into the clean, logical, and blessedly silent hallway. The machine had worked. The input of evidence had produced the output of justice. The process was just beginning. The victory in the courtroom was not an end point. It was a key, unlocking a series of new strategic doors. I had won the battle for my physical safety and established the legal foundation for the war to come. But a restraining order, while significant, was a defensive measure. It built a wall. I was not interested in building walls. I was interested in dismantling an empire. And Robert's empire, like so many others, was built on the twin pillars of financial leverage and public reputation. It was time to attack the pillars. My life had bifurcated into two distinct streams. By day, I was still Lena Mitchell, data strategist. I ran projections, built risk models, and presented my findings in clean, concise PowerPoints. I was good at my job, and the cool, impersonal logic of it was a relief, a respite from the controlled chaos I was orchestrating in my other life. In the evenings, my apartment transformed into a war room. Anya and I would have brief, efficient phone calls, strategizing our next moves with the precision of a corporate takeover. The opening for our first offensive came from a piece of routine legal discovery. While examining the title report for the house, Anna's paralegal had flagged a recent credit inquiry from a major commercial bank. It was linked to a pending application for a home equity line of credit. Robert is trying to leverage the house, my house, our house, Anya explained over the phone, her voice crisp. He's planning something big. A real estate deal, most likely. He needs liquidity. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. He was arrogant. He had assumed the legal process would be slow. That he would have months to move his assets around before anything was finalized. He had miscalculated. He had failed to account for my efficiency. The lease pendens has frozen the application, Anya continued. But the bank doesn't know the full story yet. All they see is a property under litigation. We can provide them with a little more context. We spent an hour drafting the letter. It was a masterpiece of professional, dispassionate communication. It was not an emotional plea from an abused stepdaughter. It was a formal notification from a legal co-owner of a significant asset, advising a financial institution of an increased liability risk associated with one of their clients. We addressed it to the head of the bank's risk management department, a name we found through a quick search of their corporate directory. In clean, legalistic prose, the letter stated that Mr. Robert Mitchell, a current applicant for a significant line of credit, was the subject of a permanent restraining order for domestic abuse, case number 78C4519, Multnomah County Court. It further stated that his residency rights to the property he was attempting to leverage had been judicially suspended. We attached certified copies of both court orders. We didn't need to editorialize. The documents spoke for themselves. They painted a picture not of a stable, reliable businessman, but of a volatile, high-risk individual who had just lost legal control of his primary collateral. We sent it via certified mail, a method that provided a digital receipt of delivery, a clean data trail. For a week, there was silence. Then one afternoon, Anya called me. There was a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. I just got off the phone with Mr. Davies, she said. He was agitated. He accused us of tortious interference with a business contract. He threatened to sue. And? I asked, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. And I calmly explained that we have a legal and fiduciary duty to protect our client's interest in the shared property, and that notifying a lender of a material change in the status of that property and the co-signer is standard practice. He didn't have a response to that. She paused, but that's not the important part. He let something slip in his anger. He mentioned a land development deal out in Washington County. It seems Robert and a partner were in the final stages of acquiring a large parcel of land for a housing development. The deal was contingent on Robert securing his share of the financing within the next 30 days. A deal, Davies told me, worth approximately $1.2 million. I leaned back in my chair, the view of the city from my office window seeming sharper, clearer. $1.2 million. It was the kind of number Robert loved, the kind of deal that fed his ego, that proved his status as a master of his universe. The bank has put an indefinite hold on his application, Anna said. More than that, the restraining order has triggered an internal character review. He's been flagged. It's highly unlikely any reputable lender will extend him that kind of credit now, not with a domestic violence charge and a frozen asset on his record. The first pillar was cracking. His financial leverage, built on the foundation of my mother's house, was gone. He was trapped. He couldn't sell the house. He couldn't borrow against it. And now the opportunity he was counting on was slipping through his fingers. It was a beautiful, elegant cascade of consequences, each one logically following the last. But I wasn't finished. Destroying his finances was only half of the equation. The other half was his reputation, the carefully constructed facade of the respectable, powerful man. Mr. Davies had given me the final piece of data I needed, Robert and a partner. That night, I opened a new file on my encrypted server. I thought back over years of holiday dinners and family barbecues, of Robert holding court, boasting about his latest ventures. He was always careful with details, but he loved to drop names to impress people. A name surfaced in my memory, James Carlson, a name he had mentioned several times, always with a mixture of respect and rivalry. Carlson is sharp, he'd once said, but he doesn't have my appetite for risk. A quick search on LinkedIn, and the state's business registry confirmed it. Carlson Development LLC, Managing Partners, Robert Mitchell, James Carlson. Their website was a slick portfolio of successful projects, filled with testimonials praising their integrity and professionalism. I spent the next hour carefully composing an email. This was a far more delicate operation than the letter to the bank. It had to be surgical. It couldn't be perceived as libel or harassment. It had to be the concerned, reluctant communication of a third party providing vital information. I sent it from a new, anonymous email address. The subject line was simple, regarding Robert Mitchell. Dear Mr. Carlson, I am writing to you with considerable reluctance, but as you are in a professional partnership with Robert Mitchell, I believe I have a moral obligation to bring a serious legal matter to your attention, as it may have implications for the professional integrity of your shared business. I am attaching two public documents from the Multnomah County court system. The first is a permanent restraining order issued against Mr. Mitchell for reasons of domestic abuse. The second is a court order suspending his residency rights from his home due to the same. I am not a lawyer, and I do not know the specifics of your partnership agreement. However, I am aware that many such agreements contain character or morality clauses to protect the reputation of the business and its partners. I am providing this information to you so that you may perform your own due diligence and take whatever actions you deem necessary to protect your company. Sincerely, a concerned party. I attached the PDFs of the same court orders we had sent to the bank. I reread the email a dozen times, analyzing every word. It was perfect. It made no accusations. It simply presented court-adjudicated facts. It didn't tell him what to do, it empowered him to protect himself. It was a seed of doubt planted directly into the heart of Robert's professional world. I hit send. The response was not silence. The response was a tectonic shift that I could feel even from miles away. 2 days later, an article appeared on a local business news website, Partner Sues in Carlson Development Shakeup. James Carlson had filed an emergency petition to dissolve their LLC, citing irreconcilable differences, and a potential breach of the partnership's ethics clause. The article was vague on the details, but it mentioned Carlson was seeking to buy out Mitchell's share of the partnership immediately, likely at a steep discount, to salvage the pending land deal with new financing. Robert was being publicly, professionally neutered. The man who had built his identity on being a pillar of the community was now the subject of public speculation and scandal. His name was now associated not with success, but with a lawsuit and an ethics investigation. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. The city lights glittered below, a vast, complex network of systems and connections. For years, I had been a victim of a small, toxic system, one I thought I could never change. But I had learned you don't change a corrupt system from within. You introduce external data, you apply pressure to its critical nodes, you create a cascade of failures, and then you stand back and watch it collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The second pillar was crumbling. And I had been the one to light the fuse. The call came on a Thursday evening, a week after the article about Carlson Development had made its quiet splash in the local business world. It was my mother. I didn't recognize the number at first. She was calling from a new prepaid phone, a clear sign that Robert was no longer in her life, but the fear of him still was. Her voice was not the hysterical, sobbing mess it had been after the restraining order. It was a thin, brittle thing, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was the sound of defeat. "Lena," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you come to the house? There are things we need to discuss." "Is Robert there?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "No, he's staying at a hotel downtown. He's not allowed here. You know that." "I'll be there on Saturday at 2 o'clock, I said. It was not a question, it was a statement of fact. "We can talk then." I did not go to the house for a reconciliation. There was nothing left to reconcile. I did not go to gloat. Victory was a logical outcome, not a cause for celebration. I went as a strategist goes to a treaty negotiation, to dictate the terms of surrender. In my briefcase, I did not carry a family photo album or a peace offering. I carried a set of freshly drafted legal documents prepared by Anna's firm. The house felt different when I walked in. The oppressive weight of Robert's presence was gone, and in its place was a vast, hollow emptiness. The air was stale. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light slanting through the living room windows. It was no longer a kingdom, it was a museum of a failed regime. My mother stood in the middle of the room, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. She was swimming in a grey cardigan, her hair uncombed. Beside her on the couch sat Rebecca. If my mother looked defeated, Rebecca looked erased. The fiery indignation was gone, replaced by a pale, listless silence. She stared at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She did not look at me when I entered. She did not say a word. The family's chief diplomat had run out of talking points. "Hello, Lena," my mother said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming." I did not reply. I walked to the heavy oak dining table, the site of so many tense meals, the stage for my final humiliation, and placed my briefcase on its polished surface. I clicked open the latches, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. I took out a single, thick folder. "We need to discuss the house," I said, my voice cool and even. It was the same voice I used to brief executives on quarterly risk assessments. The court-ordered appraisal was completed on Wednesday. The fair market value is estimated at $950,000. After the original mortgage is paid off, the remaining equity is roughly $600,000. My share, according to the agreement, is 1/3, $200,000. I laid out the facts like coroner's instruments, cold and precise. My mother flinched as if each number were a physical blow. Rebecca remained motionless, a statue of sullen guilt. My mother wrung her hands, her knuckles pale. "Lena, please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes and beginning to trace slow, familiar paths down her cheeks. "Robert, he's a broken man. He's lost everything. The partnership with James, the land deal, his reputation is ruined. Isn't that enough? Does it have to be the house, too? This is our home. Our home. The word was a lie. It had been his home, we had all just been living in it. There has to be another way, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Is there any way we don't have to do this? Any way we can just go back? Her question hung in the dusty air, a desperate, pathetic plea to rewind time, to unsign the contracts, to unhear the words, to unfeel the slap. She was asking for a world without consequences. The world she had lived in for a decade, propped up by my silence. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just the calm, dispassionate finality of a closed case. Yes, I said. There was. But that way was 10 years ago. It was the day you should have stood up for me when he smashed my laptop. It was the day you should have told him he couldn't banish your daughter from Thanksgiving. It was every single time you chose his comfort over my safety. That was the way. It's gone now. We can't go back. Rebecca finally moved. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before skittering away. In them, I saw not hatred, but a dawning, horrified understanding. The understanding of someone who had bet on the wrong side and lost everything. She had been Robert's loyal soldier, and he had been defeated, leaving her stranded in a ruined landscape with no one to give her orders. My mother's tears were flowing freely now, a quiet, hopeless stream. So, what happens now? She sobbed. You sell the house and take your money and leave us with nothing. This was the moment. The moment they expected, the final, vindictive twist of the knife, the moment the selfish daughter would finally claim her prize. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single document, sliding it across the polished surface of the table toward her. This is a quitclaim deed, I said. It transfers my entire 1/3 share of this property to you, free and clear. I don't want the $200,000. I don't want any of it. Sign it, and the house is yours entirely. My name will be removed from the title. I will walk away. My mother stared at the document, as if it were a snake. She looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. You would do that? Because this was never about the money, I said, my voice dropping, each word a carefully weighed stone. It was never about the house. It was about him. It was about removing a cancer from our lives. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady, unblinking. This was the final term of the treaty, the non-negotiable clause. I will sign this document and disappear from your financial life forever on one condition. You file for divorce from Robert, I said, and you get a lawyer, a good one, to ensure that the divorce settlement includes a permanent injunction preventing him from ever setting foot on this property again. No visits, no holiday dinners, no just stopping by to pick something up. He is to be gone from this house and from your life permanently. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of my mother's ragged breathing. I had just offered her a choice. Not a punishment, but a choice. A clean, simple, binary choice. The house, her home, her security, or him, 4 years. She had tried to have both, to balance the equation by subtracting from my well-being. That was no longer an option. If you choose him, I continued, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper, if you let him back into your life, if you drop the divorce proceedings, then I will not sign this. I will instruct my lawyer to proceed with the forced partition and sale of this house. We will sell it, pay the lawyers, and split what's left. You will lose this home. Robert will be gone either way. The only variable in the equation is what you are willing to sacrifice to keep this roof over your head, him or me. I stood up. My part in the negotiation complete. I had presented the terms, the power, for the very first time, was entirely in her hands. The choice was hers. I had spent my entire life being the variable in her happiness equation. Now she was the variable in her own. I looked at Rebecca one last time. She was staring at the quitclaim deed on the table, her face a blank mask. The loyal peacekeeper. The girl who had always begged me to be a good sister and keep the family together was now faced with a choice that would tear it apart for good. No matter which option her mother chose, the system she had worked so hard to preserve was in its death throes, and there was nothing she could say to save it. "You have my lawyer's number," I said to my mother. "Have your lawyer call her when you've made a decision." I turned and walked out of the house, leaving the document, the silence, and the choice behind me. I did not look back. The week that followed my visit to the house was a week of absolute silence. I received no calls, no texts. I did not check for emails from my mother or try to find out what was happening. I had presented the terms of the treaty, my move was complete. The board was now theirs to play. I went to work. I ate dinner. I slept. I trusted the system I had set in motion. I knew that a choice between survival and sentimentality, however painful, was ultimately a simple one. My mother had spent a decade making pragmatic choices to ensure her own comfort. I had simply changed the parameters of the pragmatism. The news of her decision did not come from a tearful phone call or a dramatic confrontation. It came as all the most important information now did, in a quiet, clinical email from Anna. It arrived on a Friday, nearly 2 weeks after I had issued my ultimatum. Subject, Mitchell Property Resolution. Lena, it began, this is to confirm that I received a call this morning from Eleanor Vance, the attorney retained by your mother. Mrs. Mitchell has instructed Ms. Vance to proceed with filing for divorce from Robert Mitchell on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, citing the restraining order as a contributing factor. Furthermore, Ms. Vance has confirmed that they will be petitioning for a permanent injunction as part of the divorce settlement, barring Mr. Mitchell from the property at 1254, Elderwood Lane. They have accepted all terms of our proposal. The quitclaim deed has been signed by your mother and is being filed with the county clerk today. A copy is attached for your records. Your name and all associated rights and responsibilities will be officially removed from the property title by close of business. The file is now closed. Best, Anna. I read the email 3 times. The file is now closed. 4 simple words that signified the end of a lifetime of conflict. There was no surge of elation, no desire to celebrate. There was only a profound, quiet sense of stillness, the feeling of a long, complex equation that had finally been solved, the answer clean and absolute. I had built a system, and it had performed its function perfectly. I opened the attached PDF. There was my mother's familiar looping signature next to a notary seal, a simple scroll of ink that had severed a family, ended a marriage, and bought her a home. I deleted the email. I didn't know the full story of what transpired that night until much later, pieced together from a stray comment from an aunt and the dry legal language of the final divorce decree. But I could picture it with the vivid clarity of a well-executed simulation. Robert had been living in a transient hotel near the airport, a place of beige walls and the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner. He had been stewing in a toxic cocktail of humiliation, rage, and disbelief. In his mind, the court hearing, the restraining order, the collapse of his business deal, these were temporary setbacks. They were the results of my hysteria. A woman's tantrum that would eventually subside. He was a man of power and substance. He believed, with the unshakable faith of a true narcissist, that my mother's loyalty, her dependence, was a law of nature. He believed she would break. He believed she would call him, weeping, begging him to come home and fix things. When 2 weeks passed with no call, his disbelief curdled into a possessive fury. He had been patient. He had given her time to come to her senses. Now he would go and remind her who was in charge. The restraining order was just a piece of paper. The house was his. He had paid its bills, mowed its lawn, ruled its inhabitants. It was the throne of his power, and he was going to reclaim it. It was a Tuesday night, close to midnight. A cold, persistent drizzle was falling, the kind that slicks the roads and chills you to the bone. He parked his car down the street, as if he were a thief. The indignity of it fueling his anger. He walked up the flagstone path. The key to the front door clutched in his hand like a weapon. This key was a symbol. It was his access, his ownership. He would slide it into the lock, turn it, and the satisfying thud of the bolt retracting would be the sound of the world returning to its proper order. He would walk inside, and his presence alone would be enough to end this foolish rebellion. He reached the front door, shrouded in the darkness of the unlit porch. He didn't hesitate, he thrust the key into the lock. It didn't go in. He pushed again, harder, jamming it against the brass. It wouldn't fit. Confused, he pulled it out, squinting at it in the gloom, as if the key itself might have changed shape. He tried again, jiggling it, forcing it, his frustration mounting. The only sound was the useless scrape of metal on metal. It was the wrong key, but it was the only key he had ever had. A dim light was on in the living room. He moved to the window, cupping his hands against the glass to peer inside. The house was the same, yet different. His favorite leather armchair was gone. The family photos on the mantelpiece, the ones of him and my mother and Rebecca on various vacations, had been replaced with a single small photo of my mother and me, taken years before he had ever entered our lives. A wave of pure, impotent rage washed over him. She had dared. She had dared to change the locks, to erase him. He went back to the door and began to pound on it with his fist, the heavy thuds echoing in the quiet suburban street. "Elizabeth," he roared, his voice raw, "Elizabeth, open this door. Open this door right now." He hammered on the door for a full minute, his knuckles raw, his shouts swallowed by the drizzling rain. No one came. The light inside remained on, a silent, indifferent sentinel. He was locked out, not by a judge, not by a piece of paper, but by her, by the woman he had considered a possession, an extension of his own will. She had made her choice. He finally stopped, his chest heaving, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He stood there for a long time, staring at the door, at the house that was no longer his. The silence from within was more damning than any argument, more final than any slammed door. It was the silence of his irrelevance. He was an outsider, a ghost haunting a life that had already moved on. Defeated, he turned and walked back into the rain, the useless key still clutched in his hand. My phone started ringing the next morning. It was Rebecca. I saw her name flash on the screen and I watched it, my face impassive, until it went to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared, "He came to the house last night." I deleted it without reading the rest. She called again an hour later, and again in the afternoon. She left long, rambling voicemails. I never listened to them. Her calls were the last desperate signals from a dying system, a system I was no longer a part of. Her attempts to reach me were not about reconciliation. They were about her own discomfort, her own terror at the new, unstable world she now inhabited. She was looking for someone to blame, or someone to fix it, or someone to simply respond to her and validate her own chaos. I was no longer in the business of validating chaos. My silence was not a punishment, it was a boundary. It was the quiet, firm closing of a door, the turning of a key in a new lock. It was the final, non-negotiable term of my own freedom. My victory was not in his defeat at the door or in the legal documents that proved my success. My victory was in the quiet that followed. It was in the unanswered calls, the deleted messages, the profound and unshakable peace of a file, finally, mercifully, closed. 6 months after the file was closed, I sold my condo. The sale was quick, the market was strong, and I walked away with a significant profit. I took the proceeds and bought a smaller, more efficient apartment in the Pearl District, a place of polished concrete floors, high ceilings, and a wall of windows that looked out over the city I now felt was truly mine. It was a 15-minute walk from my office. The address was known only to my lawyer and my employer's HR department. My new phone number was given to a grand total of 5 people. I had not just moved. I had executed a strategic relocation, creating a firewall of anonymity around my life. My old condo, the first fortress of my independence, had served its purpose, but it was still tethered to the past. It was the place I had returned to after the slap, the place where I had planned my war. My new apartment was a blank slate. It held no ghosts. I furnished it sparsely with clean lines and functional pieces. There was no clutter. It was a space designed for clarity, for breathing, for a future I was now free to write on my own terms. The external war was over, but I knew with the clear-sightedness of a good strategist that the internal campaign was just beginning. You cannot spend over a decade in a psychological war zone and emerge without scars. Victory in the courtroom does not automatically silence the echoes in your own mind. So, I took the next logical step. I found a therapist. Her name was Dr. Alastair, a woman with a calm voice and eyes that didn't just listen, but processed. I chose her for the same reason I chose Anya. She was a systems thinker. In our first session, I laid out the history of my family not as a tragedy, but as a data set. I described the power dynamics, the feedback loops of enabling behavior, my role as the designated shock absorber. I explained the strategy one had deployed to dismantle the system. I talked about it all with a cool, clinical detachment. Dr. Alastair listened patiently. When I was finished, she nodded slowly. You've successfully diagnosed and dismantled a corrupt external system, Lena, she said. That is a remarkable feat of strength and intellect. Our work now is to do the same for the internal system it created, the one that taught you that love is conditional, that your value is based on your compliance, and that silence is the price of admission. For the first time, I felt the ice around my heart begin to crack. Her words were not emotional, they were an assessment. And in that assessment, I felt seen in a way I never had before. My therapy sessions became the place where I learned to deprogram myself. I learned that the hypervigilance that had kept me safe in my family was now just a source of exhausting anxiety. I learned that my need for absolute control in my life was a trauma response. We talked about my mother, not with anger, but with a kind of forensic pity. We analyzed her choices, her fear, the profound weakness that she had disguised as maternal love. I began to understand that her betrayal was not personal to me, it was a symptom of her own brokenness. It did not excuse her, but it did finally free me from the burden of her choices. We also talked about Rebecca. Do you ever think about reaching out to her? Dr. Alastair asked one afternoon. I considered the question honestly. In the weeks after the final legal proceedings, I had received a flood of communications from her, sent through friends, through distant relatives. They were a chaotic mix of blame, tearful apologies, and desperate pleas for me to just talk to her. I had ignored them all. No, I said, the answer coming easily, without a trace of anger. I used to fantasize about a grand confrontation, about making her see everything she had done, everything she had ignored. I wanted her to feel the weight of her complicity. And now there's nothing. Seeking revenge on Rebecca, or even seeking her apology, would mean I still need something from her validation, acknowledgement. It would mean I am still a part of that system, still waiting for another character to play their part. I'm not waiting anymore. It was the truth. My feelings for Rebecca had simply evaporated. She was a ghost from a life I no longer lived. To engage with her would be to invite the chaos back in. And my new life was built on the foundation of a hard-won peace. Withdrawing from her was not an act of punishment, it was an act of profound self-preservation. My new life took on a gentle, steady rhythm. The quiet of my apartment became a comfort, not a silence to be filled. I excelled at work, not out of a desperate need to prove my worth, but because I enjoyed the elegant logic of my job. I started hiking on the weekends, losing myself in the green, misty trails around Mount Hood, the physical exertion a clean, simple antidote to the complexities of the past. I learned to distinguish between solitude and loneliness. I had spent years feeling lonely in a crowded room. Now, for the first time, I felt a sense of complete and contented peace in being alone. One rainy Saturday, I was browsing in a bookstore downtown when I saw her. My mother. She was across the aisle in the gardening section, her back to me. She was thinner than I remembered, her movements slow, hesitant. She reached for a book, her hand trembling slightly. For a moment, our lives were separated by nothing more than a few feet and a shelf of books on perennial flowers. A dozen different scenarios played out in my mind. I could walk away. I could approach her. We could have a tearful reunion. We could have a bitter, whispered argument among the paperbacks. The old Lena, the one programmed by a decade of dysfunction, felt a pull, a vestigial sense of duty. But the new Lena, the one who sat with Dr. Alistair every Tuesday, simply observed. I saw a sad, lonely woman who had made a series of choices that had led her to this moment. Her life, her choices, were no longer my problem to solve. Her happiness was no longer my responsibility to maintain. I put my book back on the shelf, turned, and walked quietly out of the store, the little bell above the door chiming softly behind me. I did not know if she had seen me. It did not matter. I walked out into the cool, damp Portland air, pulling the collar of my jacket up. The rain felt clean on my face. The war was over. The case was closed. The system had been dismantled, and I was finally, blessedly, free.